Hello, Econ students. Welcome to this PowerPoint, still part of Unit 4. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what the government does to prevent illegal monopolies. We call them trusts or antitrust legislation, for example, and also talk about the way businesses organize themselves, what different ways that they set themselves up and fund their businesses. So we're going to start off with what's called antitrust legislation today, and this really started in the 19th century, late 19th century, with the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, which was used to break up Rockefeller's Standard Oil in a little before World War I think it was 1910. Basically, companies cannot get so big and buy out so many competitors that they basically have a harmful effect on the economy by limiting competition. Um, and so, in order to buy another company out, to merge is the term, you have to request permission from the Federal Trade Commission, who either approves or disapproves. For example, AT&T and T-Mobile have tried to combine for years. They repeatedly deny them, thinking that that would have a harmful effect on competition in the cell phone business. A lot of mergers end up getting approved because there's so many different um, competitors out there that it's not going to hurt the customer's choice. They're still going to have a lot of choices. Some of the other agencies that are meant to protect consumers would be the FTC. We talked about that. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, they make sure that pharmaceutical companies follow the rules in testing their drugs that they're producing, make sure that they're ethical, and make sure that they are useful for people and don't have any terrible side effects. They also look at food, make sure food's inspected and healthy, and cosmetics like makeup. One thing they don't monitor, which a lot of students are surprised, is supplements, vitamins and supplements. When you go to the vitamin and supplements aisle at, Costco or Walmart, you'll see on the back these products have not been evaluated by the FDA. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're harmful, but they haven't been proven by the FDA to actually have a benefit. The next one's the Federal Communications Commission. They basically make sure that radios, televisions, the internet, make sure that they're fair, make sure that they don't, spread, illegal speech, things that fall outside the First Amendment, and make sure that they have licenses and things like that. The Security Exchange Commission, we're going to talk about the stock market in a little bit, but they make sure that the stock market's following the rules, make sure that, for example, let's say I have a brother who works at, let's say, Boeing, the airplane company, and he tells me, hey, brother, we're about to release this new design of an airplane that's going to just blow up. Our company is going to get so big. We're getting a lot of money. You need to buy some of our stock. You need to invest in our company. Well, that information is secret, but he gives it to me anyway. I buy stock in Boeing. I make tons of money. That's insider trading. That's illegal. It's a felony. That's what Martha Stewart, famous chef, got nailed with years ago. But they make sure that investors follow the rules. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, no real surprise there. They make sure that companies are not being harmful to the environment, make sure they're following regulations like getting rid of their waste ethically in a clean manner, making sure that the products are environmentally safe, things like that. And then the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, they make sure that non-food and drug products are safe. So make sure the products don't have like lead paint in them or things like that. These are just some examples of some different things that each agency deals with. We won't worry about going through that. Deregulation is when the government takes away some of the rules for companies because regulations cost companies money to follow them. Deregulation makes it cheaper for companies to operate, which makes it cheaper for customers to buy the products, which has some positives. There has been some deregulation. For example, the airlines were deregulated, not completely, but some in 1978. And there were some pros. You had a lot of new airline companies which dropped prices. More people were flying than ever before. They could afford it. The cons, service decreased because the government wasn't monitoring it like food service. It was never good, but it was bad back then. I've been told because I wasn't alive in 1978. Airports were overcrowded, a lot of more people flying, and because the government wasn't protecting labor unions as much, there was a lot more employee layoffs and wage cuts. In general, Republicans favor some less regulations on businesses, make it easier for businesses to work. Democrats favor more regulations. They're more suspicious of companies trying to cheat customers. But to make it perfectly clear, both sides, both Republicans and Democrats, are pro-business. And both Republicans and Democrats agree that businesses should have some regulation or some, the government should be a referee making sure that they don't break the rules in dealing with customers. You're going to read this article, answer the questions as a part of this, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that. That gives you a little bit of an update about the article after you read it. So now we come to the way businesses are organized. 3 ways. We're going to talk about sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. So sole proprietorship. These are businesses that are owned by a single person. Sole meaning one. So one person owns and operates. If you remember Mr. Todd from Mr. Todd's Pies, the Shark Tank clip we watched, that's an example. Advantages. Very easy to open and close. You get the money through a loan or investment, or you borrow the money or whatever, or you have the money saved up. You open your business. You want to close it. You close it. The government really doesn't worry much about you because you don't pay much in taxes, so you don't make them a lot of money. So the government really doesn't keep huge tabs on you. You have total control over your business. You get to decide what you sell, how you sell it, what the business looks like, and ultimately you get to keep, if you're lucky enough to have profits, to keep profits. Downside, you have to come up with all the money yourself. These companies typically don't last more than 5 years. I think the most recent stats are about 3 out of 4 companies, sole proprietorship companies, do not survive 5 years. The final disadvantage of a sole proprietorship is you have unlimited liability. Liability is the idea that you are legally responsible for your company. So if you sell a product that makes people sick or hurts people, the lawsuits come back to you. If your company doesn't do well, like 3 out of 4 companies don't survive, and you still owe money to the bank because you loaned money to them, guess what? It's you alone who are responsible for paying the bank the money you owe them, or your investors, whoever else loaned you money. Now, there is the business bankruptcy, which can get you out of some of your debts if you don't do well, but you're still going to lose quite a bit of your assets as well. In some bankruptcies, you can lose personal assets like house, car, even luxury items like if you have a jet or if you have, a boat. You can lose those as well in order to pay back those who you owe money to. All right. The second type is a partnership. This can be, more than one. So it can be 2, 3, 4 people. And there are advantages. Again, it's fairly easy to open and close. The government still really doesn't care much about you because they're still pretty small. You don't pay a lot in taxes. You have access to more resources, more money. So it's not just you having to get money. You have partners. Joint decision making. So you have more people to bounce your ideas off of, which is oftentimes a good thing. And finally, specialization. This is what I mean. If you have a partner, maybe you're better at like talking to people and talking to the customers and selling stuff. Maybe your partner is better at like doing the finances and doing like the logistics behind the scene. So that's better use of your time. Disadvantage, still unlimited liability. You and your partner, it comes back to you, or partners comes back to you if you owe money or if something happens to the product or you get sued. Anytime there's more than one person, there's potential for conflict. People don't see the business going in the same direction. That's conflict brewing. And then finally, limited life. Partnerships typically don't last more than 5 years either. More than 50% fail within 5 years. And then the last one's called a corporation. These are the big ones. These are the Fortune 500 companies. These are basically, in order to get money, they sell pieces of their company called shares or stock. Once you're 18, you can buy shares or pieces of companies. Depending on how big or how successful the company is, depends on how much a share costs. Some companies you can buy shares for pennies. Some companies like Google or Amazon will cost you in excess of $1,000 per share A few companies will cost you hundreds of thousands per share. And that's how they make money. The way you make money on that is, if you buy a share and the company does well, your share of the company goes up in price, becomes more valuable. You can sell it back on the stock market and make profit off of it, kind of like flipping a house or a car. Advantages to a corporation: access to resources, more money, professional managers. So you don't have to actually manage the company yourself. If you're the owner, you have professionals like chief legal officer, chief financial officer, chief executive officers who do the day-to-day operations. There's limited liability. Typically, if you're like a stockholder in your company and the company you have stock in goes bankrupt or is sued, you're not sued and you don't owe money for the bankruptcy. Just your stocks become worthless. You lose the money you invested in it. And typically these companies, another advantage, they last a long time, going all the way back to things like Wells Fargo, which goes back to the mid-19th century. Disadvantages: costs a lot to start up, costs a lot of paperwork, a lot of permission by the government, and the government will be paying attention to you. You are taxed both on your revenue, the money you make, and on your profits, the money you make above revenue. And ultimately, you lose total control of your company because you're not total owner anymore. You have lots of other owners. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the stock market. But that's corporation. So let's look at the three ways in which businesses finance themselves, ways in which they pay the bills, they get started. One is retained earnings. So if you make profit 1 year in your business, like Mr. Todd made, I think $850,000 was his revenue. After he paid the bills, he ended up keeping around $150,000. That's his profit. He can keep that money, or he can reinvest it in his business to help it grow. That's called retained earnings. Another one is stock issues. You can basically sell pieces of your company to investors in stock. And there's the good old-fashioned borrowing. Banks, mommy and daddy, family members, you name it, can borrow money, but typically you owe interest when you borrow, which means you're not just going to owe what you borrowed, but you're going to owe extra as a fee for borrowing that money. There are three types of businesses that don't exist for profit. One of them is a labor union. These are, were formed during the Gilded Age. During the Progressive Era, towards the end of the Gilded Age in the early 20th century. Groups of workers that band together to try and demand better working conditions, better pay, things like that, like the Railroad Workers Union or the American Auto Workers Union. There's a national teachers union called the NEA, National Education Association. Also non-for-profit organizations. They don't exist for profit, hence the name, like the Red Cross, Salvation Army. Heron High School is a non-for-profit. A lot of these usually have some sort of like ethical or moral sort of purpose to them, like Wheeler Mission or things like that. And then you have co-ops. Cooperatives basically exist for the shared benefit of the owners, who are also its customers. So for example, let's say you live in a rural county where there's a lot of farmers, and no one farmer has a lot of money, but they all need to grow their farms. And so they put all their money in like a co-op, which is kind of like a bank where they're the only customers. So only they can draw money out of the pool of money they've put in there. So if they need a new tractor or better fertilizer or whatever. And then finally, there's two ways that businesses compete or advertise or compete against each other. One is called price competition, where basically mine's cheaper than the others, so buy mine. The other one is basically everything else that's trying to convince people to buy the product. So for example, celebrity endorsements is huge. So this is Shakira. Pepsi hired her to endorse Pepsi, so the message is, you buy Pepsi, you'll be like Shakira. Or Coca-Cola have these adorable, polar bears. If you drink Coca-Cola, you can share a warm, a warm winter's night like a polar bear or something like that. Or, free gifts, cereal, free gifts found inside or whatever. Some notable examples: Heinz ketchup. This says, Heinz ketchup is so natural, it grows from the ground, which it doesn't. If you buy this cologne, you will dress, smell, sound, and look like Matthew McConaughey, which it won't, but that's the message. And an older one because neither of them are involved with the company anymore, but buy Papa John's pizza and you're Peyton Manning's buddy for life. So that's another example of non-price competition.